For the uninitiated, mid-August is Japan's spooky season. Obon is the final of 3 consecutive strings of national holidays in Japan and is basically traditionally understood as Japan's haunted season. That's why if you visit Japan around July or August, a lot of promotional goods involving ghosts and other haunted things can be seen in stores everywhere. While Halloween is a fun thing in fall, August is Japan's truly spooky month. Last year, I really wanted to make an Obon themed video, but since my computer died a year ago, my plans were dashed. This time, however, I can, and I thought the best way to introduce the inaugural video for this simple concept is to highlight the unique, overlooked Japanese action adventure horror game, Slitterhead. Editing me inserting myself in here. So while I was editing this video, I realized that my own captures were unusable. There was an error with OBS and it didn't play nice with my ultra wide monitor. So I am using gameplay from a long play channel called SHN Survival Horror Network. Their full playthrough of Slitterhead. I'll make sure to credit them somewhere in this video aside from the shout out, but I just wanted to put that out there. But yeah, back to the video. Slitterhead was created by Bokeh Games Studio, a studio founded by Keiichiro Toyama, the director of Silent Hill, Siren, and Gravity Rush. After leaving Sony Japan Studio in 2020, Toyama founded his own company. In hindsight, probably due to the fact that not long after, Japan Studio would be closed and restructured due to games like Gravity Rush 2 being deemed not strong enough to expand PlayStation hardware sales. In any event, Bokeh Games Studio was formed and they quickly announced their first big game, Slitterhead. Slitterhead was eventually released in 2024 and received generally mixed to average reception. To be honest, I didn't know anything about it until after I started doing some cursory research for my Gravity Rush video. But it intrigued me because the Wikipedia article, when discussing the gameplay, simply describes it as being based on Gravity Rush and Siren. Well, as of making this video, I haven't played the Siren games, but with Gravity Rush being very much in recent memory, I have to wonder how this game is anything like Gravity Rush, so I decided to get it on PC and experience it for myself. Slitterhead as a class of game relative to the AAA landscape is a tricky one to categorize. This game runs on Unreal Engine 5, and that can be pretty obvious by the way it looks. From a zoomed out perspective, the game really does give the impression of a game that is punching above its weight in terms of perceived budget, thanks to its visuals and details of its main characters. However, it doesn't take long to realize that this isn't a big AAA game. Unreal Engine affords developers the tools to create photorealistic visuals, or at least visuals approaching photorealism, but budgets remain the primary limiting factor with regards to hardware available to the developers, the number of 2D and 3D artists on staff, and production timelines. Given this, I would say that this game sits inside the AA umbrella, where highly detailed assets were reserved for main character and environmental detail in service of the story and setting, while also putting an obvious significant amount of time towards developing the game's gameplay mechanics. The game's setting is inspired by the Kowloon Walled City, a legendary dense cluster of living quarters in Hong Kong. This serves the game well in terms of its overall design, since it does have elements of a limited open world. something akin to what you might have experienced in a game like Shenmue, for example. However, this is not a true open world game, but I'll go more into that later. The game features very highly detailed main characters with impressive, if a bit noisy, hair rendering, clothes made from distinguishably different materials, and cloth physics. Since the game takes place almost entirely at night, you are met with colorful neon lights in the shopping districts and drab, gray, and rusty colors for the slum areas. Lighting and reflections do not utilize ray tracing, opting instead for basic screen space reflections and shadows. While not noticeable in normal gameplay, on closer inspection, you can see screen space occlusion artifacts, especially when you situate a character in a scene in a certain specific way. But since the game's minimum GPU requirement is a GTX 1060, it's safe to say that this is an acceptable choice since, again, it is virtually unnoticeable during gameplay. However, what is noticeable during gameplay is poppin' and stuttering. Despite this game targeting relatively older hardware, especially for 2026 standards, with its recommended GPU being the RTX 2070, likely due to its faster memory and 8GB frame buffer, even on my RTX 5070 and 7800 X3D PC, traversal stutters still occur, and I found they occurred more often and with greater severity in this game than they did in Silent Hill F, a much more demanding and oddly similar UE5 game. However, I did notice that during longer play sessions, the stutters did significantly dissipate and only happened during traversal and not during combat, or at least if they did, they didn't hinder combat in any meaningful way. Cutscenes are a mixture of real-time and CG cutscenes, and it can be easy to tell a difference based on the level of character detail on non-player characters matching the same level of detail as the main characters. Cutscenes are skippable, which may be an important detail to some given the game's progression design. While both in-game and pre-rendered cutscenes seem to be in Unreal Engine 5, the pre-rendered scenes sometimes do the real-time graphics the misfortune of highlighting the game's lower detailed character models. It's not as jarring as the visual differences between pre-rendered and real-time visuals in other games, but it is a bit of an adjustment for the eyes, though I suppose the utilization of pre-rendered scenes are meant to increase the accessibility of the game in terms of hardware requirements and make it scalable to last-gen consoles like the PS4. But non-player characters are interesting in their own right. You are expected to interact with NPCs quite often as part of this game's gameplay design, and one of the interesting things about this is that despite their noticeably lower detail, NPC designs occur in a surprisingly high variety. For a game of this scale, it's impressive, or maybe I'm just easy to impress. While base character models are admittedly quite limited in number, although quite representative of the variety of different types of average people you would run into in a city like this, they have a wide array of different costumes and accessories. My guess is there is a form of procedural generation that was utilized here to dress up character models using the different clothing and accessory assets to make visually unique NPCs that are representative of a city and avoid the comparatively heavy workload of creating individual bespoke character models in large volumes, which still runs the risk of players encountering perfect clone NPCs. For a game like Slitterhead, which emphasizes NPCs as an important part of the story, whatever technique Bokeh Game Studio used to create NPCs really does help breathe life into the world, regardless of the lower detail of those NPCs. The game's plot is unique. Oftentimes, I've heard many say that this is hard to follow, and that really is due to the fact that the way the game disseminates information to the player is in a largely nonlinear and fragmented way. You take on the role of a Hyoki, who takes the name Night Owl, and he has the power to possess humans who have the ability to connect with Hyoki. Rarities are those who have a special aptitude and an especially strong connection with Hyoki. The first rarity Night Owl encounters is Julie, who gives him the name Night Owl. Over time, he also comes into contact with Alex, another rarity, who has a philosophy that is the opposite of Julie. These two would end up being the game's main characters going forward, but another rarity who sees some importance in the mid-game is Anita. Basically, there are 3 different simultaneous plot lines in progression at once, each with their own arc and conclusion. I think what makes the plot partially difficult to follow is the fact that a significant amount of time in the game is dedicated to infiltrating a cult, which is dedicated to humans and Slitterheads living in harmony, whose leader seems poised to be the game's big villain. But actually, the real conflict is with Alex and his Hyoki, which is an alternate worlds version of Night Owl, also called Leopardhead. There's a huge time travel, world splintering, dimension hopping thing happening here. The game's emphasis on time travel and restructuring of events, basically experiencing the same events several times but influencing the outcome in different ways, possibly risks making the story that much more difficult to follow. There is also a pretty deep-reaching backstory for Night Owl, which is optionally unlocked through gathering all his lost memories. Although some words or phrases are replaced with a script that is largely incomprehensible without an alphabet conversion chart. From the beginning, Slitterheads are going around Kowloon killing people, basically eating their brains, since this is how they sustain themselves. They occupy human bodies while under disguise, and then when they feed, free their true forms partially in order to do so. Slitterheads will sometimes bring their full selves out during combat to bring their full strength to bear in the event of a particularly challenging fight, and they usually take on the form of octopi or mantises. You learn their origin near the end of the story, but I won't spoil it here. I'd be lying if I said I really understood the story fully myself. Because of the game's structure, I kind of got lost in the sauce since some elements of its game design seem a little antithetical to its narrative flow. Progression through the game is entirely mission-based. While you will encounter a string of missions which are entirely sequential for the most part, the game opens up to a very non-linear stage selection style of progression. You can learn about where to go next or what to do based on conversations you have with the various rarities you unlock. What has frustrated reviewers in the past with this style of progression is that because this is mission-based, a lot of the time the story will refuse to progress until you have unlocked the rarities. But if you don't use them, then they have almost no significance to the story whatsoever. Unlocking rarities isn't a hassle, since it's pretty easy to even unlock them by accident. That's how I unlocked Blake. But since the game makes unlocking all of them necessary for seeing the end of the game, it can be a bit of a head scratcher as to why. The mission you choose to pursue depends on which mission nodes you choose within the stage. This is basically restructuring, as the game refers to it. This can mean anything from collecting memories, completing challenge shrines, or reducing stage casualties, the latter of which serves as your key to the game's true ending. Sharing in similarity with Gravity Rush 2, Slitterhead also has a fake credit roll and a real credit roll, and even after finishing the story, comes up with a message saying there is more to the game through collectibles and higher difficulty. In any event, it became helpful for me to interpret the game's mission-based system as something akin to A-rank hunting in Sonic Adventure 2, rather than trying to understand it as a linear story progression interface. While most stages allow you to choose which rarities you want to enter with, some stages require or prohibit a specific rarity, which is obviously in the interest of preserving the game's story continuity. While the progression isn't entirely clear and navigating it can be a bit tricky to get a grasp of at first, it is certainly unique and a creative way to handle a game's progression. In fact, given the limited scope of the game's world size and its assets overall, time travel makes a lot of sense since it can save on budget and assets by reusing them, but rearranging them slightly every time and justifying it narratively. It minimizes the game's install size and also gives the game a sense of length that it might not otherwise have if, again, everything had to be built from scratch with new environments needing to be built. It might mean that you see a lot of the same stuff all the time, but the repetitiveness is much less apparent thanks to the narrative. It's pretty ingenious. The game also features a character upgrade feature where each character has their own stats related to their blood weapon, active, and passive skills. These are leveled up by unlocking skill tokens, which can then be redeemed on the status screen for leveling up various aspects of the character. The maximum level for each skill is 3. The blood weapon upgrades and soft skills are shared across all rarities, and active skills are mostly exclusive to the individual rarities. There are 8 rarities in total with their own strengths and weaknesses meant to be paired with other rarities with abilities which complement the other. Since you are usually asked to go into each mission with 2 different rarities, you are meant to consider how their abilities synergize with each other. The rarities and their active skills are Julie, who comes with Sonic Claws, Blood Ripper, and Revive All. Alex, who comes with Bloody Blast, Blood Well, and Time Bomb. Anita, who comes with Mind Hack, Devil's Scent, and Poison Needle. Edo, who comes with Deflect All, Angel Step, and Burning Edge. Doni, who comes with Fatal Lance, Revenge Guard, and Curse Resist. Try, who comes with Sentry Thorns, Bloody Knuckles, and Crimson Chains. Blake, who comes with Bloody Shot, Bloody Mine, and Bloody Gamble. And Betty, who comes with Indomitable, Diabolic, and Lunatic. All of these active skills have their own effects. Most notably, Julie's Revive All skill will revive all civilians and your partner rarity on the field so long as there is blood on the ground. Alex's Bloody Blast is a powerful shotgun blast that can be charged for greater damage output. Blood Well will basically act as a black hole for enemies, which bunches them into one concentrated area, providing Alex the ability to do quick damage to all the enemies all at once. His Time Bomb basically serves as a self-destruct, which does damage to the user, but also a fair amount of damage to the enemy as well. Anita's Mind Hack basically recruits all civilian NPC characters to rush the enemy and attack it simultaneously, and the Poison Needle infects the enemy with a poison status, which slowly does chip damage to their HP over time. Edo's Deflect All allows Edo to automatically deflect all attacks that aren't undodgeable, and Angel Step allows Edo to dodge more quickly. Burning Edge gives him a temporary attack buff. Doni's Fatal Lance is an attack that can be charged and capable of dealing massive damage, and Curse Resist allows him to break a curse effect he's hit with during combat encounters. Try's Sentry Thorns summons sentry turrets which fire at enemies continuously, dealing damage until they are destroyed. Blake's Bloody Shot summons a Gatling gun which can deal really solid rapid ranged damage. Betty's Indomitable gives her a damage reduction and gives her the chance to counter an attack in the event she and an enemy attack each other at the same time. There is more, obviously, but these are the ones I found particularly most noticeable since they were the ones I used the most for my playstyle. As we'll see later, this game offers quite a lot of flexibility in terms of playstyle. Passive skills are all the same across all characters. In total, there are 12, and they are Vitality Boost, Durability Boost, Empower, Deflection Wave, Regenerate, Compassion, Possession Wave, Revival Boost, Sixth Sense, Hold Break, Quick Rise, and Heal Boost. Vitality Boost increases the rarity's maximum HP. Durability Boost increases the rarity's blood weapon durability because they can be broken. Regenerate allows a rarity to retrieve a severed arm while it is still in the air if you input the correct QTE command. Sixth Sense allows a rarity to see multiple attacks coming from multiple enemies despite being locked on to only one enemy. Hold Break allows the rarity to break free from a hold by an enemy more quickly, taking less damage, and Quick Rise allows the rarity to recover quicker to being knocked down by an enemy, helping to minimize the chances of being stun locked. Revival Boost and Heal Boost might sound like different names for the same thing, but the distinction is that revivals are performed mostly on civilians and rarities are taken out, whereas healing deals with a rarity or a civilian still active. More on that later. Overall, the system seems a bit complicated, but generally it is pretty straightforward to level these stats up relatively quickly. Every level they increase, the higher the token cost. If you go for all achievements in Slitterhead, you will also end the venture with a fully spec'd out team of rarities. The token economy in this game is basically 1-to-1 with the number of possible upgradable stats. That means finding all the collectibles, completing all the objectives and challenges, and finishing the game. There is no possibility of ending with a surplus of tokens and nothing to spend them on. Now let's talk about gameplay. Slitterhead is interesting because it has a couple of gameplay styles it tries to add that are seemingly incongruous with its main gameplay mode, but thematically makes sense. It might be weird to start out with this, but I might as well get it out of the way. There are stealth sections in this game, but they are very shallow and generally unsophisticated, probably for the sake of the cult arc of the game and pushing its narrative, rather than anything trying to be seriously stealth like your Metal Gear Solid or Splinter Cell style of games. It's based on a rudimentary line of sight system since I don't think the guards can hear your movement, nor do they have peripheral vision. This just says to me that this gameplay style was inserted into Slitterhead purely for narrative purposes and not meant to be fleshed out. It does utilize a possession mechanic as a way to get around impassable situations, but they are far from challenging. There are also portions of the game which force you to search for a specific spirit or Slitterhead in the semi-open world. This is a unique mechanic which basically gives the player a hot and cold system to judge their position relative to their target. This is indicated by both visual and audio cues, where the visual aspect manifests as a purple haze that appears in the peripheral areas of the screen. If turned away from the enemy, the purple haze will concentrate itself on the part of the screen as a way to point in the direction of the target. When the target is straight ahead, the purple haze will encircle your character on all sides. Additionally, there is also the ability to sight jack to help place where exactly the target might be or what direction they might be moving in. This is a really cool feature, especially since your target can sometimes be on the rooftops rather than the streets below, and using the sight jack can easily clarify where exactly they might be. You can also tell how close you are based on whether or not you can see yourself in their sight. You usually appear as a bright yellow light, and to be honest, to me it looks like an ominous sight for your target since they are so unassuming. You stand there like their personal Michael Myers, but they don't know. It's eerie, but a helpful tool. There are also chase sections, which sometimes follow up the search sections. When giving chase, the target is lit with a bright red node, which you can use to track their movement even through environmental geometry. It is also met with an auditory chime whenever it appears on the screen. You are basically tasked with chasing the target through the city and to damage them until it either triggers a proper battle or a cutscene. While chasing itself is self-explanatory, what it highlights the most is the game's movement mechanics. There is some light platforming in Slitterhead. A is to jump, but your character can also hop over lower objects like short walls, dumpsters, fences, etc. by pressing the A button again when in contact with the obstacle. While chasing a target, they will occasionally knock over boxes or throw civilians in your way, which your character can trip over if you don't avoid them. They are best avoided by possessing other civilians ahead of the target or, suboptimally, jumping over the obstacles. There is also a Spider-Man-esque mechanic which allows your character to jump onto select places high above the ground that are usually some kind of protrusion from a wall. When they enter a specific part of the screen, an icon above them will be highlighted. Pressing Y will launch your character onto that platform in a way very reminiscent of Spider-Man. But if your target is already there or lands there with you already on there, you will be knocked off the platform unless you manage to hit them upon landing. That part is pretty fun to execute. Generally, your character can manage falls from pretty high places, but a fall from a very high place will lead to sustaining fall damage and a long recovery time. There is also a sprint, which can be activated by clicking the left analog stick in, much like you would for a first-person shooter's sprint. I apologize in advance for describing the controls specifically in terms of the Xbox controller, but to be totally honest, for third-person action games, I generally prefer to use a controller, even on PC with few exceptions, and I don't have a copy for this game on PS4 or PS5, but I'm sure that the button mapping correlates exactly with the Xbox controller to the DualSense. As for PC, I have no idea. So now let's talk about combat, arguably the meat and potatoes of this game. The action aspect of this game is what was meant to separate this from the traditional horror stylings to make it more palatable for those who are generally put off by pure horror games. As a result, I believe the combat probably received the most resources in terms of design development. The controls are generally simple. You move with the left analog stick and turn the camera with the right. You use the X button to attack, A to jump, B to dodge, and Y to execute various other actions like reviving downed civilians or rarities or regenerating a severed arm. The right bumper can be used to use pools of blood to heal your character, and the left bumper is pressed and held to change the character you wish to possess. Not all NPCs can be possessed, but the ones who can are highlighted with a shining yellow marker. Rarities are marked with a brighter yellow mark. Locking onto an enemy is accomplished by holding down the left trigger and executing an active skill by pulling the right trigger. Your active skills can be toggled between using the D-pad. Each active skill is displayed on a disc on your HUD with 4 cardinal directions of the D-pad corresponding to a specific active skill. Since only one can be activated at a time, you select the one you want to use by pressing that respective direction on the D-pad. Then there are the controls for the game's parry mechanic, or as it calls, deflection. This is probably the most unique aspect of the game since it requires a little bit more from the player than simply pressing a button with the correct timing. When an enemy is winding up for an attack, a blue indicator will show up on screen, which telegraphs the direction an incoming attack will come from. This only happens while you are locked onto an enemy. When this happens, you must use the right analog stick and push it in the direction of that indicator with the correct timing to achieve a successful parry. It's quite a unique way to handle a mechanic that many have begun to decry in recent years, and while this isn't necessarily the only means by which you are expected to deal with enemies and bosses, it is a very useful tool. As a personal anecdote, I went through a lot of the game interacting mainly with this parry mechanic because it was so satisfying to pull off, and while I would say it is highly inefficient and would not recommend doing that, it is kind of a fun self-imposed challenge. With combat controls out of the way, how does this all work? While the game might seem somewhat similar to a Souls-like experience, if you interact with the game's combat mechanics as intended, it's really quite different. Your HUD has 3 different gauges, which are your blood gauge, your skill gauge, and your blood time gauge. Your blood gauge serves as your HP, and it serves a double purpose. In order to activate active skills colored in red, it costs blood. You basically sacrifice a portion of your HP to activate these skills. It's a risk versus reward situation since these skills cost you HP, but have the possibility of ending a combat encounter faster. The skill gauge, which is blue, is active for skills highlighted in blue and recharges over time. Only one skill can be activated at a time and operates on a cooldown system. That is, every individual skill has a cooldown. So if you activate, say, one skill, it needs time to cool down, but you can still activate the other ones, which also take different amounts of time to cool down. The game operates on a cooldown system for these skills, taking time to be used again, likely as a way to avoid being totally abused, especially for rarities. However, not only rarities can use these skills. Regular civilians possessed do, and they usually share these active skills with the rarities you choose to come in with. As stated before, parrying is a more involved yet satisfying mechanic. A blood time gauge fills after every successful parry, and once filled, enters into blood time, which slows time around the enemies and allows you to do a bunch of damage to them within a fairly generous window of time. This is matched with the possession mechanic. Once you press and hold the left bumper, your Hyoki will leave the possessed human they are currently controlling. Time slows down, and you are given a choice of another human vessel to take control of. Choosing another human is as easy as holding the left bumper until your preferred human's blue marker turns yellow and letting go of the bumper. The Hyoki will then rapidly travel the distance necessary to possess them. It should be noted that the Hyoki has a certain distance it can travel both in all directions around its host human, as well as up and down, using the right bumper to move up and the right trigger to move down. The Hyoki cannot travel through solid objects, including windows, but can travel through fences. The newly possessed human, upon being possessed, receives an attack buff, with which they can deal significantly more damage, and this is the pivotal part of the game's combat. Attacking the rear of an enemy doesn't do additional damage, but it does lead to a higher chance of severing the human host body from the Slitterhead, which can be necessary for unlocking certain rarity costumes. Enemies have a certain number of attack types as well. The first is a regular attack, which can be parried. There are also undeflectable attacks, which are telegraphed with a red flash. These attacks can only be avoided by dodging or by possessing another human. Or you can interrupt them, which leads to a stun, which is very helpful sometimes. Slitterheads also have blood attacks of their own, some of which are simple projectile attacks, others are more area of effect attacks like giant shotgun blasts or summoning countless blood grenades. There's also a laser attack, which has one of my favorite sound effects in the game. Higher level Slitterheads will also have curse attacks, which will handicap your characters in some way and can only be dispelled by stunning them or killing them. Slitterheads, finally, also have holding attacks. While holding attacks aren't entirely common, they basically grab hold of your character and you must mash the Y button to escape or else sustain massive damage. There is also an arm sever mechanic. Much like how you can sever the human body host from the rear of large Slitterheads, so too can they sever the arm of your character, which disarms them, meaning they are unable to attack. If your character is a rarity and they have the regenerate passive skill, they can catch their severed arm while it is flying through the air or automatically regenerate it if you miss the QTE input to catch it. Without the regenerate passive skill, that character will have to physically find it in the battle arena and reattach it manually. When you move to possess other characters in the arena, save for your encounters with Julie or Alex, the Slitterheads won't be aware that you switched bodies. As a result, the Slitterhead will continue attacking the bystanders until it becomes aware of the human that is actually possessed. Damage to NPCs might not sound like an important detail since even when possessed they are weaker and slower than the rarities, but they are important fodder for use against the enemies. This means that you are also best served keeping as many of them alive as possible. This means using the time the Slitterhead is confused to your benefit to revive any downed NPCs in the vicinity that can be invaluable to your success in battle. Not only can it accomplish reducing your end stage and global casualty count, but also give you the best fighting chance against a Slitterhead, since sometimes rarities alone aren't always enough, especially when you are asked to face two large Slitterheads at once. Your strategies may vary depending on how you choose to interact with these various mechanics, but I ultimately found that the best strategy, when applicable, was to rapidly pass possession from human to human, ideally always behind the targeted Slitterhead, and pelt it with damage-buffed hits, switching back and forth until it either uses an AoE attack, moves out of the way, or downs one of the characters. You can sometimes revive NPCs by possessing them while they are down, which restores about half their HP, which can be incredibly helpful in rapidly bringing back a handful of them from the brink, because, aside from rarities, when they're dead, it's permanent. While human vessels are largely disposable, the Hyoki isn't completely safe either. The Hyoki can't occupy a body that is downed. If a human is downed while the Hyoki is occupying it, the Hyoki is ejected and basically takes a hit. The Hyoki can't be in possession of any human if they are downed more than 3 times. Once downed the 3rd time, it's game over. Additionally, if the Hyoki loses a human and has no other humans to possess, it is also game over, which makes management of all the NPCs, rarities, and possession switching timing all crucial for success. It sounds complicated, but it is pretty easy to get the hang of after some practice. I've heard it said that the combat mechanics feature quite a bit of jank, but to be honest, the only jank I ever really encountered was whenever I was cornered tanking damage and had no idea what I was looking at because the camera was stuck. Aside from that, maybe thanks to some post-launch patches or something, I found that I found the combat to be quite engaging and rewarding to interact with, even if the enemies aren't always the most interesting to look at after the mid-game. Slitterhead being the first game by Keiichiro Toyama since Gravity Rush 2 and the first game released by his newly formed game studio, I wonder if people had higher expectations for Slitterhead. Slitterhead's position in the backdrop of the modern video game industry is a difficult one to discern. Is it an indie game? Is it a AA game? Somewhere between an indie or AA game, or between a AA and AAA game? Maybe, maybe not. Back during previous generations of gaming, especially from the 7th generation and earlier, it was quite often when multi-platform games would be released by medium-sized game studios that were of a mid-sized budget would be a dime a dozen. These games were made on modest budgets and released with the expectation for modest sales that would easily recoup the cost of production. After all, it is easier to pay off the cost of producing a game with a smaller budget than a larger one in raw sales, setting a realistic expectation for sales numbers. As we've seen with the acquisition and closure of many of these studios in the last several years, as the industry seems to be moving towards the high-budget blockbuster model, games like Slitterhead have suddenly become much more difficult to categorize. Don't ask me why, but Slitterhead kind of reminds me of Shenmue in a weird, inverted way. Shenmue, at the time one of the most decadent games ever produced, and its sequel constituted some of the most expensive games ever produced at the time. They represented the cutting edge of technology when wielded by the unfettered ambition of its creator. Slitterhead, the first game by an independent studio founded by a game director who seemingly saw an end to the kinds of games he wanted to make in the short time preceding the closure of the studio he once worked for. It is a game that clearly understands what its constraints are and is built well within those confines. It used a licensable technology and as a narrative built around the fact that an expansive world like the one achieved in its spiritual predecessor, Gravity Rush, might not be technically possible. And yet somehow it manages to build a world convincingly large enough that it is hard to notice during gameplay that you've been here 3 times before in the last hour of gameplay. Shenmue, in its ambition, has a world roughly similar in size to the one in Slitterhead. Both have unique combat and progression mechanics that at least I have not really experienced anywhere outside of them. While my only acquaintance with Toyama's work is with the Gravity Rush games as of yet, I can't help but to see his want for mechanically and narratively creative games, ones wherein the narrative and gameplay converge seamlessly. It's an approach to games as an art in a way we only seem to see from Japanese auteur types, who seem to see the medium as something more than just a way to spend your time, which is refreshing against the mostly standardized, sterile corporate safety in the Western AAA space. And I don't mean to disparage AAA game studios because I know the pinch they are in is an extremely tough one, and their products tend to be the result of deep institutional faults rather than creative ones. And while Japanese studios aren't free of that kind of corporate sterilization of creativity, the independent scene in Japan with these medium-sized studios with experienced developers and directors who want to make a game based on an idea they have that offers a unique experience seems to be in no short supply here. I think that's why we can still get games like Slitterhead, and why I think games like Slitterhead deserve to exist. Slitterhead is not a perfect game, but, what is perfect anyway? Maybe isn't the most polished experience out there. Perhaps there are games with tighter control or are more technically stable or sound. Maybe there are games that look a lot better with control schemes that are easier to pick up and play. In an unintended contrast to Rise Son of Rome, a game I just discussed not too long ago, it's interesting to see how a game with amazing technology built on gameplay systems that are tried and true with a proven successful track record in the industry can feel so much less engaging than a game that tries something totally different. Part of it might probably be the fact that Slitterhead's friction filled progression system and its unorthodox control scheme and combat mechanics made it more engaging than simply defaulting to a best practices style of gameplay. Maybe that's what it is? I don't really know. There's probably more to it, but there's got to be a reason why I'm more willing to go back to get 100% achievements in Slitterhead than in Rise. Slitterhead will likely become a cult classic game in the future. Not everyone will resonate with this game, but to those with whom the game resonates, I think it will resonate with them strongly. Maybe that's not what the team at Bokeh Game Studio intended for the game, but the mainstream is picky and can't always be guaranteed to pick up a game that goes outside of the familiar. But to those of us adventurous enough, I think there is something here worth experiencing. Maybe it isn't a retro game, strictly speaking, but it is retro in spirit. And so with that, keep retromaxing.